Andrew, we see this tension between the federal and state governments again, reported in the paper, but you've got some other exclusive information which reflects a similar sort of sentiment, Andrew.
That's right, Kieran. It appears tension on a number of fronts. So 1 minute Queensland was part of a national emergency in terms of last week's floods. Now the Commonwealth Government has decided not to declare the disaster in that state a national emergency.
When I say I'm going to consult someone, I mean it. I'm not so stubborn as to not listen. And when the Premier tells me she doesn't think it's necessary, well, of course, I'm going to listen to that.
But a week ago she didn't think it was necessary. She said it was too late.
Well, if she thought it was necessary a week ago, she could have written to me and asked me to do it, but she didn't. That's the way it works. If the state wants it to be done, then they can request for it to be done, and no such request was made by the Queensland Government.
With residents in places like Lismore able to access emergency $1,000 payments and people in neighbouring and equally destroyed Mullumbimby unable to, Prime Minister Scott Morrison risks being accused of potentially nickel and diming his floods response. The decision to exclude parts of the New South Wales Northern Rivers from the emergency floods payment has gone down like a lead balloon up there, New South Wales government sources tell me. Scott Morrison decided to turn this flood situation a national emergency and to go up to Lismore to announce that on Wednesday, but neither New South Wales nor Queensland governments agreed to what he then asked for. He wanted them to write to him asking that he make the declaration. Emergency Management Minister Bridget McKenzie then seemed confused on Friday in the wake of the announcement as to what it all meant.
There's actually a threshold trigger for calling a national disaster, and you know, if a national, like if there was a nuclear attack, that would be an immediate response. Whereas there was no single event through the course of that week that would trigger the threshold in the legislation for us to be able to do that.
So Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk decided late last week the crisis had passed in Queensland and it was no longer a national disaster, and did not write to the PM calling on the declaration to be made. And New South Wales, who were asked to write, also decided not to write to the PM, believing the federal government had the power to declare it a national emergency without their letter. Finally, on Friday night, the federal government decided New South Wales was a national emergency, but Queensland was not. The power gives you the right to move in and coordinate responses, and the government says cut red tape about allowing you to have defence help out on the ground, move around a bit easier. And as Kieran mentioned, a report in the Sunday Telegraph today revealed Defence offered support early on in the New South Wales floods crisis and were rebuffed by the State Emergency Service.